Hello, everyone. This is Fred Cobb. Welcome to another episode of Cybersecurity Weekly. I'm your host, Executive Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer here at InfoSystems. And with me today is our VP of Marketing, Mr. Josh Davis. Hey, Josh, how's it going?
How's it going? How are you, Fred? Hey, everybody.
Doing well. Thanks, Josh. And we're going to talk a little bit about something that's being talked about by everybody, but I want to take a slightly different angle on it. And that's some of the security measures you can, or should be, let me put it that way, should be thinking about as you are working from home, as your employer is sending you home to do the daily business until we get some relief from what's happening out in the world today with the COVID-19 pandemic. So it caught a lot of people off guard as far as the readiness. I know when companies started going to a work from home workforce, we were very busy here at InfoSystems scrambling. A lot of customers did not have the appropriate number of VPN licenses, as an example, or their workers had desktops and they weren't prepared to have mobile devices such as laptops and or tablets to send home with their employees. So many companies were in scramble mode to get these things put into place. And I know we've helped a lot of companies, and we've seen a lot of that sort of settle out over the last few days. So hopefully companies are getting everything set up that they need to have set up. But we wanted to today just talk about some things. Again, this may be a rehash of some things that have already been said. We just want to put the InfoSystem security spin on it, for lack of a better term, and make sure that we get the information out there so that you can take some precautions if you haven't already. And I think, Josh, one of the first things that come to mind is the administrative aspects of setting up a work from home workforce, and that includes a telecommuting policy. A lot of companies were not prepared. Again, we've already stated that. We're simply not prepared from an administrative point of view to they didn't have a policy already that their employees had previously signed and understood. It was a scramble mode. Let's get everybody up and going from the technology perspective, and the administrative pieces and parts of that sort of got overlooked. But some critical things to think about when you construct a telecommuting policy, as you're doing it in arrears, since most people do not have those, or most of the companies I've been talking to didn't have an official one. One of the things to remember, and we'll get to the security pieces and parts here in just a minute, but just administratively, the fact that your work from home space, whether it's an office, whether it's your bedroom, whether it's the kitchen counter, whatever that area is where the workers are conducting their 8 to 5, it's considered an extension of the business workplace. In other words, there's OSHA regulations that have to be considered. Technically, and of course, this could be argued in a court of law, or please seek the advice of your counsel as you're building your own telecommuting policy. But the area where the employee is doing this work, if it's a mandated work from home situation, is considered just regular office space. So there's safety precautions that have to be taken into account. You could go so far as saying, well, you must have a fire extinguisher in the area, you must have a first aid kit, you must have emergency response call numbers posted somewhere so that you can easily, get to them should a safety situation arise that would require you to call, an ambulance, as an example. So a lot of that is overlooked. You wouldn't think about that being an extension, because for years and years, people have been working from home.
Mm-hmm.
And many companies have, even though they've had work from home staff for years and years and years, they really haven't put that type of policy in place. So it's something that needs to be looked at. I know I spent many years with Hewlett Packard, as an example. My last 11 years, I was full-time work from home. I never signed a policy that said I agreed that my home office is an extension of the business office and I must have a first aid kit or a fire extinguisher. So it's something that a lot of companies are behind the curve on, but highly encourage business owners, particularly if you've mandated work from home, to really take a hard look at what you have in your administrative control, around the telecommuting policy. So, Josh, I'll pause for a minute. I don't know if you've got anything to add there.
We'll be back with the Cybersecurity Weekly podcast after we pause for this special message. Security analysts believe cyber attacks will continue to escalate throughout 2020 and are recommending that every company, regardless of industry or size, place immediate focus on cybersecurity training and the tools that will protect you from these attacks. Did you know that you can book a cybersecurity assessment right now with Fred Cobb's team of cybersecurity engineers at InfoSystems? They will help you discover exactly where you are most vulnerable to a cyber attack and make recommendations on how to strengthen your defense in those areas. This is urgent. It's an issue that affects everyone in our community. Visit the InfoSystems website at www.infosystems.biz to request your cybersecurity assessment. Now back to the podcast.
Yeah, that's good info. And, I think a lot of companies probably provide an option for their employees to work from home, just like you said, on a regular basis. Before any of this situation hit, a lot of people were just sort of flexible and had the option to work from home. And that, I think what I hear you saying is that there doesn't necessarily need to be a policy, that type of stringent policy in place when it's optional and it's sort of up to the employee's discretion where they work from. But when the employer mandates to the employee that you are a work from home employee, you're going to work from home, that enacts a little bit of a different requirement.
Exactly right. The key word there is mandate. And if it's a recommendation or it's a voluntary work from home situation, it's totally different in what the policy might say around those safety protocols that must be in there. But if it's you must do your job from home, and that carries some additional weight that has to be accounted for within the policy. Again, not giving legal advice here. Certainly seek the advice of your legal counsel, your corporate attorney, or your public counsel that you've contracted through a retainer, however you got that set up. But do pay some heed to that. So enough about that. Let's talk a little bit about some of the security controls that are paramount to making sure your work from home workforce is as safe and they are protecting your data, your business to the best of their ability, and you're holding them accountable to do certain things to protect the business environment. So one of the big ones is the idea of using your own device. Let's provide an example of a company. Let's say they've got 100 employees. Your typical work from home or telecommuting workforce is maybe 20. So all of a sudden, the entire workforce is working remotely. They didn't have laptops, to dole out to all the 80 additional employees that typically don't work from home. So what are they doing? In some cases, companies are scrambling. They're buying up laptops or extra desktops, or they're packing up their desktops and going home with them, or digging up spare laptops out of the warehouse, what have you. But in a situation where an employee is allowed to use their personal device, which I don't recommend as a security professional, I think it's typically a bad way to go, unless there's some additional controls such as 802.11x or 1x, where you can quarantine off systems that are coming into the network, and you're doing certain analytics on the system to look and see if they're up to antivirus standards or up to patch standards before you let them onto the network. So, but this is reality. Right now, we're facing a situation where some companies just are allowing their employees to use their personal laptops or their personal desktops at home. But you should still be asking the questions as the employer. Are you running the latest antivirus? Are you running the latest patch state? In other words, when's the last time you patched? Was it within 30 days on critical patches, things like that? You should be qualifying those systems to make sure that you're not introducing additional risk into the network. And some business owners may say, well, I'm willing to take that risk under these crazy circumstances that we're under right now. So there's a lot of typical rules that maybe, let me think about that. Let me do the risk analysis in my head. Okay, that's a good idea to have restrictions, but I've got a business to run. So if the only way I can get my work done is to allow employees to use personal devices, and I'm going to take that risk. Realize that is a big risk and a huge liability potentially. But whenever you can, make sure you have those conversations with employees. And we talked about in an earlier episode, if you do allow that type of connectivity into the network, whether it's an employee-owned device or even a company-owned device, don't allow split tunneling. Make sure that all the internet connectivities funnel through the corporate firewall. That is the egress point, excuse me, is the egress point between that device that's at the employee's home and what's happening on the network. The other thing, or a couple other things I'd like to mention, is the use of VPNs. Make sure that you're using, as an example, Cisco AnyConnect or the Fortinet client if you have a Fortinet solution, or use those manufacturers' VPNs. You can even use OpenVPN if you must, but whatever you do, don't set up RDP, the remote desktop protocol that's native in the Microsoft world and has been around forever, it seems. There are some widely publicized vulnerabilities out there where if you do set up an RDP gateway and you do expose the specific port 3389 to the outside world, there are widely known attacks, exploits against exposed RDP ports. So you can become a victim of one of those attacks simply by turning on RDP and exposing it to the outside world. So make sure you're not doing that. Make sure you're using a qualified VPN of some sort. That gives you some added protection on the network for your remote connections.
Fred, you mentioned at the opening of the episode VPN licensing. Can you explain a little bit what happens when, if you're going to use a Fortinet or one of these, or Cisco manufacturer, and you own some of their hardware components in your network? How does the VPN licensing happen?
Sure. Let's say we've got a Cisco firewall, let's say an ASA 5000 series firewall, and we typically don't have a large work from home workforce. So, out of the box, with most of the Cisco series, you're going to get a couple of OpenVPN, not OpenVPN, but AnyConnect VPN connections. So you're sitting there with 2 licenses, and all of a sudden you've got 25 employees that need to utilize those 2 licenses. Well, obviously you're going to have a bottleneck, and efficiency is going to come to a screeching halt. So typically what you would do, you buy another block or set of licenses. One would plug those into the firewall, and that just gives you expansion capabilities on the number of concurrent VPN connections that you would allow through that firewall into the corporate network. It's
Gotcha.
fairly easy setup to add licenses. Most of the time they're not that expensive. They sell them typically in blocks of 10, regardless of the vendor. But that's, when I say adding VPN licenses, in essence, that's what we're talking about doing, just plugging in those additional licenses or the key that gives you those additional concurrent capabilities within the firewall.
Yeah, good to know.
Yeah, good question. So we talked about, OpenVPN. We talked about the risks associated with using personal devices. We talked about telecommuting policy. Last thing I want to touch on during this segment is around training the employee. I can't tell you how many times that even with all the training that's available out there, that we see undertrained employees when it comes to spotting nefarious, phish campaigns where you're getting something through an email, say, hey, click here to win the jackpot. Or you get something from someone that says, hey, here are the pics that you had requested. So first inclination, right, to the untrained staff is, let me click on that because I'm curious as to what that is. What's happening there, you may have just released some sort of malware, a Trojan, a worm, even ransomware, which is a variant of malware, onto the network simply because you were curious about the link, you were curious about the attachment that was in the document. So you have to constantly train. And if you're an employee out there, pay attention to what you're getting in an email. Pay attention to what you're looking at, in a web link. If you get a web link via an email, be extra cautious before clicking on that. You might want to inquire. In other words, if you get an email from someone that you typically do business with, but it looks fishy to you, pick up the phone, call that person. Did you send this to me? If you get something that looks obvious as being nefarious, the best thing to do is contact your security staff, contact your IT staff, and say, hey, I just got this, and wait for instructions. They will tell you what to do with it, whether it's just, yes, we've seen this on other systems. Make sure you do a permanent delete, shift delete, what have you. The last thing you want to be doing is mailing that around. Hey, have you seen this? Have you seen this? Because as you mail it out to more people, maybe you're the only one at the business that got that, but you send it out to 10 other people saying, hey, what's this? Somebody may click on it out of curiosity to answer your question. So it's important to train on being able to spot phishing campaigns. And internally at InfoSystems, we do it on a regular basis. We know a lot of companies that do that. So it's particularly important to do with a dispersed workforce. Make sure you've got that training available and people are taking the training and they're being tested occasionally with simulated phishing campaigns. So.
A funny example of that, just today, I got an email that had an attachment, and the subject line of the email was just Vmail, and then in the body of the email, it was disguised to look like one of those voicemail files that gets generated from your phone system and sent to your email, and it had an attachment, and I recognized that it wasn't legit. I forwarded it to our cyber services team, which is what our employees are instructed to do. If we get something that we're unsure of, send it over to cyber services, let them inspect it. They'll provide feedback on whether it's safe or not. And so the feedback I got on that was that it was in fact a phishing email, and I assume that they're able to explore those through some kind of walled off environment or secured environment, because they even gave me the feedback that would you have clicked on this, it would take you to an exchange prompt, Microsoft Exchange prompt, asking for your login credentials to retrieve this voicemail. And of course, it wasn't actually Microsoft Exchange. It was disguised to look like it with the hopes of capturing your login credentials for your email.
Exactly. And that's a good process, because I'm here at InfoSystems and work with the cyber services team. I happen to know that we do have a sandbox where we can take those incoming suspect emails and we can detonate those, or if it's an executable, that comes as an attachment, or if it's just what appears to be a nefarious link, we can look at those in a sandbox without compromising, the corporate network. And we have the capability to do some deep dive analysis on what type of attack that might be. So it's good to have that capability. A lot of companies out there do have that capability, but always err on the side of caution. And that was the perfect response when you got that. That's exactly textbook as to what we like to have happen here at InfoSystems, and most companies should have a similar process.
Yeah.
Well, Josh, I think that's all we want to cover today. In upcoming episodes, I want to get back on the Center for Internet Security, Critical Security Controls discussions. Chad Waddell, Senior Cybersecurity Expert here at InfoSystems, and we covered the first three in some previous episodes. What I want to do is tackle the next three. In upcoming episodes, we're going to talk about things such as handling the amount of log data that you're getting. Why is it important to not only maintain logs, set up logging, review that log and capture that information. So we're going to cover that in one of the controls. We're going to talk about hardening systems using things such as the CIS benchmark. So lots of good stuff coming up related to the Center for Internet Security CSC controls, and that'll be coming up probably in the very next set of episodes. I appreciate you hanging out with me today.
Yeah, enjoyed it.
Good. And for everybody out there, we appreciate you taking the time to listen or to watch the podcast. We always want to come up with new and exciting information for you to absorb. So definitely reach out and contact us. Josh, I don't know if you have the phone number handy. Someone wants to call in and pose a suggestion to us.
Yeah, for anyone who wants to call or text, you can use the area code 423-697-9528. And that line you can either call in or text and give us suggestions for topics or questions that we can answer live on our podcasts when we record the next one.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Josh. And we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thanks.